Welcome to the Samplecast. This is episode 17. I'm Ruben Cornell, and this week we've got a ton of content for you, including two big reviews. I'm looking forward to reviewing some strings and something a little bit more unusual. Don't forget, for more information on the show, you can always head to the Samplecast website. That's thesamplecast.com. Of course, you can always catch up with the podcast as well, which is a special extended edition of the show with additional tunes and demos from sample library developers. So let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's Roundup, and an unusual one to start with. I did not think I would be covering a typewriter library anytime in the Samplecast at all, really. But there's a new one out this week from Boulder Sounds. Well, I say a new one, it's one of the only typewriter libraries I know of. It's called Tweakable Typewriters, and I couldn't resist covering it to kick off show 17. It runs in the full version of Kontakt. It's 350 megabytes in size, and here they've sampled 5 typewriters going back to 1908, so they've really got their hands on some old gear there. Here you've got chunky mechanical noises, the sounds can be mangled and processed by 20 onboard effects, and there's also 100 different convolution effects, reverbs, and some more unusual kind of IRs as well in there. So this is useful for creating weird sounding drum kits, metal kits, and other strange noises. Check it out at Boulder Sounds. There's been a lot of activity over at Spitfire Audio, so I'll run through some of the news there very quickly. Firstly, they've got a new library out called Glass and Steel. It runs in the full version of Kontakt and it's 3.3 gigabytes uncompressed. Here they've used found sounds from glass, metal, crockery, and that sort of things. Just basically they seem to have raided their kitchen. And it uses the eDNA engine, which has always been a favourite of mine. It's perfect, that engine, for mangling up sounds into strange rhythmic textures and beds and soundscapes, that sort of thing. Really throws up a lot of inspiring options and sounds. So have a look at that. It's also worth knowing that their Sable range is being discontinued. It's been around for a few years now. I gather it's being wrapped up into a new engine and updated in some kind of way, but it's not exactly clear what yet. But if you had your eye on Sable, best to pick it up in the next couple of weeks. It is on sale at the moment as well. There's a small discount, so make sure you get hold of that if you need it. Thirdly, they've announced their Bernard Herrmann project. It's got a project page up now on the Spitfire Audio website. Personally, I'm very excited about this. I'm a big fan of Bernard Herrmann and his scores over the years. There's a little bit of information on the Spitfire site, enough to kind of whet your appetite, but they don't really give too much away in advance normally. So there's no specific information about instruments or articulations yet, but stay tuned to their site, hopefully there will be soon. Next up, a new company that I've never covered before. It's a package called Voxsphere, and the company is The Cell Studio. You can find more out about this at thecellstudio.com. And here you've got 885 megabytes of ambient soundscapes, and all of these have been derived from vocal samples from their huge library. Now you've got 20 long samples. These are between 1 minute and 2 minutes long, so they're really long. You could almost create cues just with those samples on their own. There's also 30 shorter samples as well. They're unrecognisable as vocals, to be honest, but they all have a nice kind of organic quality and seem to be highly usable. The best part about this library is it's only $15, so check it out at the Cell Studio website. The last product for this roundup is Chamber Orchestra 2 Professional Edition, and that's by Versilian Studios. Here you've got over 70 orchestral instruments. That's breaking down into about 300 NKI patches. It runs in the full version of Kontakt, and it's about 13 gigabytes compressed, which is quite small, I guess, for a whole orchestra. Also small is the price. It's under $200 for the whole package, and it's a really interesting concept that they've come up with. It's been recorded in a very long space of time using musicians from all over the world. It's also surprisingly tweakable for this kind of price point. There's a lot of options within the Kontakt interface. I guess this package kind of sits in the same sort of price range and accessibility as something like Garrett and Personal Orchestra. It's not going to replace your, thousands of pounds worth of orchestral samples, but it does have an interesting engine and a cute little sound as well. The sound is pretty realistic, I think, for this kind of price point. What it seems to be mostly useful for is a great sketching tool for a small rig or somebody with a portable studio. It doesn't seem to take up much RAM or CPU, so if you think that's for you, check it out at the Versilian Studios website. Here's one of this week's big reviews, and it comes by popular request from the Samplecast Facebook page. I do get a lot of requests, and this one has been mentioned by a few people, so I'm pleased to bring it to you. Thank you so much to the guys at Cinematic Studio Strings for getting this to me in time to do the review. So it is Cinematic Studio Strings. It runs on the Kontakt player and the full version of Kontakt. There's a little bit of history with me and the products from the Cinematic range. Now, Cinematic Strings was originally developed in 2010, and although it's never been my kind of go-to library for strings, I did find that I turned to it when I wanted some nice flowing legato or some kind of quick, easy mock-ups. Cinematic Strings 2 followed up in 2012. It was an update of the original Cinematic Strings library, but they'd added now additional samples, and given the interface an overhaul, I found it a lot simpler to use, and I did use it for sketching quite a lot. And now, bringing you up to date, there's Cinematic Studio Strings by the same developers. It's not an update of those two libraries that I've mentioned before. I want to make that absolutely clear. It's a whole new set of samples and a whole new concept as well. So the original Cinematic Strings 2 sounds nice and lush. It's got a really sort of grand Hollywood feel. Cinematic Studio Strings, on the other hand, is a Hollywood style section. It's a little bit more intimate. The players have been recorded exactly where they'd normally sit in the orchestral arrangement. Here you've got 3 mic positions as well: close, main and room mics, and they've also done a mixed position if you want to use that. It's already tweaked to optimise CPU and RAM, so that's a really good thing. There's quite a lot to this library. I'm not going to go through the individual articulations and everything it does. You can find out more information about that on their website. But I will mention a couple of things that are worth knowing. The articulation is via key switch. There's 3 different types of legato on there as well, and there's Sordino emulation for the whole library. So what did I like about this library? For a start, it's very simple to understand the interface. It's really easy to work out what's going on. Hardly needed to open the manual and look at it at all, to be honest. The sound right out of the box was nice. As I said, it's an intimate sound and it's convincing without adding any reverb. There is a reverb dial on the engine, but you don't really have to use it. In fact, they don't recommend using it at all. And I did find that the sound was realistic without having to bathe it in reverb, so that's especially an added bonus. I really like the harmonics articulation, especially with the violins and violas. They had just a really lovely tone. Difficult to describe, as you know, with sound, but check out some of the demos. You can hear the harmonics in action. I did like the legato scripting. That was very clever, and how the speed of legato responded to velocity playing on the keys as well. I remember when I had Cinematic Strings 2, I had to make my own multis in order to kind of get a good sketching tool. But this time around it was nice to have full ensemble patches already set up, so thank you so much for that. The price also seems realistic for what you get. It's not especially cheap, but not expensive neither. Runs in at $400 before you factor in any discounts. There are discounts available for previous owners of Cinematic Strings, and also they've released a studio piano. Unfortunately, it didn't get to me in time for this review, but I've heard some of the demos, sounds pretty good. And if you purchase Cinematic Studio Strings, you'll get 50% off the piano. There's a couple of bugs I found within this library in the scripting. Sometimes the notes get stuck and the key switches get stuck, especially when you're doing a lot of different articulation switching and using the sustain pedal and changing the legato at the same time. I realise this sort of thing is quite complex in scripting, but definitely that should probably be looked at before you guys do an update. But overall, it's a big thumbs up for Cinematic Studio Strings. Head to the podcast for some more examples of the product in action and some demos from the company themselves. This is Bargain VST, the section of the show for good deals and good vibes. Firstly, we'll start with Fable Sound's Broadway Lights. That's available on VST Buzz. Check the link below to get more information about this. It's basically a stripped down version of their Broadway big band package. It runs on the Kontakt player and the full version of Kontakt, and it's 15 gigabytes in size, which is pretty big for this kind of library. You've got 4 saxophones, 2 trumpets, a clarinet and a trombone in there. I've actually got this library. I've had it for a number of years and use it regularly for jazz and big band mock-ups. I also use it kind of distorted and bit crunched for a lot of dance tracks that I do. The stacks I find are especially good. It's also got some really nice brass effects in there, and I've used the clarinet on quite a few different things. The clarinet I think is the standout instrument. I remember paying about £350 for it originally when it came out, which seems ridiculous now because it's 77% off and is €99.99. If you're a customer of Loopmasters, you could find yourself with some nice freebies and bonuses on your hands pretty shortly. They've just developed a new reward scheme. It's called Rewards Plus. Basically, you spend money with Loopmasters and then you can redeem a section of your spend on free packs, coupons, virtual cash and other bonuses. For the full rundown, you should have a look at the Loopmasters site. There's quite a lot of T's and C's on there. It's also worth mentioning that Loopmasters regularly have 50% off packs from not only their own labels but also other companies now as well. They've been doing this for some years, but they've really expanded their roster of companies. So now developers like Function Loops and Producer Loops are getting in on the act and selling their products through Loopmasters. And because of the good discounts on Loopmasters, it means that it's worth having a shop around, not only from the companies themselves but also from Loopmasters. You might find you get a good deal there. Next up, a discount on a favourite pack of mine. It's Cinematic Textures and Drones from Biome Digital. I covered this in Samplecast 4 and at the moment it's 60% off, so head over to the Biome Digital website and have a look at that. And they've also got a bunch of discounts and bargains on their package deals as well. The Cinematic Textures pack is a great collection of soundscapes, rises, sweeps, and there's playable instruments in there too. If you want to dip your toe in and don't want to commit, there's also a demo available on the website so you can see what you're getting into. Check it out. Here's another big review. It's Spectrum from Wave Alchemy, and the guys at Kontakt Hub have kindly supplied this to me, so check out the Kontakt Hub website. You can find Spectrum there along with a whole bunch of other products. This runs in the full version of Kontakt. It's 12 gigabytes compressed, and what you've got here is an engine that wraps up sounds sampled from 14 different vintage synths, analog and digital units. So there are iconic synths in there such as Roland Junos, the ARP Odyssey, the Korg MS-20 and many more. You'll probably recognise a lot of those names on the list on the website. Basically, this engine blends 4 layers of synth samples to create unique layered sounds from the 175 sampled sources. There's a ridiculous amount of sequencing options on board. There's 2 pages worth, and you can apply the sequencer to pitch, velocity, LFO and all different sorts of aspects of the filters as well. There's also a solid effects chain right at the end of the processing chain. There's some extra little things as well which I didn't expect, like a chord memorizer for creating big retro style chords, and there's also oscillators that you can throw into the mix too. Some things I really liked about this library: firstly the randomise function, which chooses 4 completely random sound sources for you, although I would have liked it to also randomise the effects, filtering and perhaps the sequencing as well, not just change the waveforms that were used. I'd also like to point out the snapshots were excellent and they give you good jumping off points for creating your own sounds. And the overall look of the interface, the graphics and especially the little waveform graphics that show you exactly what sounds look like, I really like those too. A couple of things that I think could be improved upon: there's quite a lot of volume discrepancy between these snapshots. I can see why they've put an enormous volume level dial on this interface, because I was constantly turning it up and down as I was auditioning the snapshots. Maybe there's a way of evening that out. Secondly, you will need to go into the manual for working out some of the more complex things about the library, like the chord recognition system and the oscillator functionality. It's explained well in the manual, but the interface isn't exactly that clear. So this is really an excellent library if you're into retro sounds, creating kind of new wave, synth pop, that sort of thing, or if you want to create bespoke vintage style tones for your orchestral pieces that maybe nobody's heard quite in the same way before. Check out Spectrum at the Kontakt Hub website. The details are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Samplecast. It's been really tough to put it together this week because I've had an absolutely hectic week, but somehow managed to pull it out the bag. Thank you for all your support on Twitter, on Facebook, the comments on YouTube. That really helps me keep going and shows me what a valuable resource you think this is. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. As I say every week, there's more information about the show on the podcast. You can also check me out on Twitter, on Facebook. You can email me directly at thesamplecast@gmail.com, and hopefully I'll have a new show for you next week. Bye bye now.